Okay, so today I'm going to do a brief introduction. I'm going to look at some industry standards, some strategies which can be employed, and also how we can use the AgileAssets, primarily the maintenance manager, to create and justify funding requests, and then how clients are currently reporting on work which is being done and which qualifies for reimbursement. Okay, so I think before we start, we have to look at what is always key here, which is, of course, your asset management plan, because any funding strategy you're going to employ is usually going to be based upon that. So really, your asset management plan is really a plan for how you can manage your asset base over a period of time, an extended period of time, to deliver the agreed upon levels of service, and also to meet your performance targets in the most cost-effective manner. And if we break that down, it's really a documented strategy of what you're maintaining, so the asset inventory, where those assets are actually located, what condition the assets are in, what performance objectives you have, and how you're going to measure each of those performance objectives. And of course, you will be looking at your life cycle costs, which, of course, on the MAP 21 and FAST-Act, you also need to introduce some risk management analysis. And then, of course, you need a financial plan, how you're going to pay for implementing that asset management plan. And then, of course, what investment strategies you're going to actually implement, when you maintain versus when you're going to go into preservation and rehabilitation. Okay, so back when I started off, we heard a lot about GASB 34. It was, you needed to get a good idea of what assets you were maintaining. Because I guess one of the challenges we've always had in the industry is if you're, I think just before I came down here, I was in the business center. So if you go to the business center, they have a set of computers out there, they have some desks, and it's fairly easy to ascertain what the value of these assets are, what condition they're in, and get a feel for what the value of what you're maintaining. It's a little harder to do that when you're looking at an entire network of infrastructure assets. So really, GASB 34 was intended to help you inventory your assets, get an idea of what the condition of those assets were, and then at a network level, really represent what standards, what conditions you wanted to maintain that network, so that even if you could not have an exact dollar amount of what that network was worth, you had a standard at which you would be keeping it. And the idea was really to be able to get a cost for how much it would cost you to either maintain the different components of that network, or if you wanted to look at preserving it using different techniques. Okay, so moving on, we went into MAP 21 and FAST-Act, which stressed more preventive maintenance techniques, which needed to be performance-based, and also introducing the risk-based asset management plans, where you needed to evaluate the risk of any asset failing, look at the impact of that failure, and then basically trade off the cost of having an asset fail versus how much you had to spend to mitigate that failure. Okay, so looking at funding strategies, so you can look at a local level. Typically, if you're looking at routine maintenance, you're going to have to pay for that at a local level, and also your county roads, your state roads, you're usually paying for these out of local funds. But once you start getting into maintaining your NHS, your National Highway System, and your interstates, then you have the opportunity to tap into federal funds. And then also, when you start getting into preventive maintenance, there are certain funds that you will be able to access federal funds to do so. And then, of course, disaster response, as we have seen over the past year, where we had a number of hurricanes in Houston, in Florida, in Puerto Rico, and you start being able to access federal funds to deal with disaster response. And regardless of where the funding is coming from, whether it's going to be coming from taxes or from tolls, that funding needs to be at an adequate level to adequately deliver the level of service that you're either promising to the feds, your local government, or the traveling public. Okay, so a key component is that you also need to consider who's actually going to be performing that work. So are you going to be doing it with your state forces, or are you going to be contracting that work? So I know a number of states, you have a certain number of state employees, and you have to keep them fully occupied. So there's a certain amount of built-in work that you can do every year, because you're going to have your labor costs and to a certain extent, your equipment costs, which are going to be sunk every year, regardless of what you accomplish or not. So there's a certain amount of built-in work that you can accommodate in-house. If you're going to contract that work, you're going to have to come up with the entire amount of money every year. But you also have the opportunity to make that a performance-based contract where you will pay for performance as opposed to just doing a particular activity. So you pay for a result as opposed to just performing an activity. But at the end of the day, what you're looking for is what is the most cost-effective means of executing that work. So if you have an activity which you're only going to be doing once every 5 years, you may want to, and it requires specialized training, specialized equipment, you may want to have a contractor do that as opposed to having to do that training in-house, and you're using it so infrequently. So it's really a question of who can do it cheaper and who can do it more efficiently. Okay, so there are a few means within the AgileAssets maintenance management system and the suite that you can use to generate needs-based funding requests. The first one would be desired level of service based. So really that's looking down at the performance measure level. So if you're looking at your road network, you may have a performance measure for alligator cracking, for shoulder drop-off, for your drainage condition, for your vegetation condition. And you need to know not only the amount of inventory that each of these impacts, but what the condition of each of those performance measures are. So what level of service you currently have for each of those elements. And really the desired level of service-based funding would be basically setting where you would like to be on each of those elements, and then basically estimating how much it would cost you to achieve each of those. The next one is optimization analysis, and that's really incremental benefit analysis, where you're looking across all those performance measures, and you're either trying to get the best overall results for these based on a fixed budget, or where you're trying to have an overall target and trying to achieve that target, your performance measure targets for the least amount of money possible. That's really where we're going to be looking at in future, introducing risk-based, the risk-based plans, where we're also going to need to look at how can we minimize the possibility of any asset failing, and trading off the cost of mitigating that asset failure versus how much it actually costs to look at that. Okay, then in the pavement management system, and we saw quite a few presentations on that this week. We also do multi-constraint analysis, which is really predictive analysis where you're starting to look at your life cycle costs. What are the best intervention points during the life cycle of any asset to do either maintenance or a rehab work to extend the service life of that asset. And then reactive needs, I know many DOTs, you do reactive needs-based plans where you're looking historically how much it costs to maintain your asset network, and then on top of that, any additional needs, any defects that you have, how much it costs to address these as well. Okay, so I'm just going to go through some of what the current clients are doing in those different areas. The first one is the desired level of service for TxDOT and their maintenance management system. So this is really a desired level of service scenario. So in the middle pane, what we have there, these are the defect measures that are labeled as maintainable elements. So you have mainline failures, mainline ride. These are the different means in which they're measuring the condition of that network. And if you look all the way over to the right side of the screen, you will see for each of those elements, the last column, what the current level of service is for that element, and then how much it costs you to achieve that level of service. So what this allows you to do is, if you're at a 4.5 for a particular element, you can trade off whether you want to be at a 5 next year or at a 4, if you want to allow that level of service to go up or down. And then you will see how much it would cost you to achieve that. So it's really you going through these different elements and deciding what targets you want to achieve, and then you can see overall how much that's going to cost you. Now, once you have done that, down in the bottom pane, what you would see is the different activities which influence that particular performance measure, and how much you would have to spend on each of those activities to achieve that, the target level of service. Again, this is a guide of what some of the things you can do to achieve that desired level of service. And this basically can be imported into your annual plan. Okay, so the next one is the optimization analysis. This is from North Carolina, and this is a multi-constraint analysis. So really you're setting up a scenario that you're going to run for multiple years. And you're either doing, well, you're basically trying to achieve some objective, and that objective is either going to be for a fixed dollar amount, and where I'm looking at all my my defect elements, and I have some index which prioritizes how important these are to me relative to each other. I'm either trying to see what are the best values, the optimum values I can get for each of those for a fixed budget, or I can basically just set minimum standards for these and see what is the minimum amount that I need to spend to achieve those targets. So once that is run, these are the results of that. So that's really going to break down to per defect element, or that's the element in this case is some unpaved structures. You're going to see how much you need to spend to achieve that score. In this case, we're dealing with a 100-point scale. So we're currently at a score of 93. This optimization takes you to a score of 95, and you can see how much you would need to spend to get there. So the first results screen basically shows you the results by element, how much you're spending on that element, and then the next screen will basically break that down into a work plan. So what actual activities would you need to perform, and the relative budgets of those activities to implement this particular scenario. Okay, so the next one is the maintenance plan from TxDOT. So this is the 4-year pavement management plan, and this is where they set up the maintenance component of that plan. So here they identify all the locations and the year in which they want to do that work. And down at the bottom, they set up all the different activities that they're going to perform at that particular location. So it's really a series of maintenance projects that they're setting up. And that is fed into their pavement management plan. These are really only the maintenance activities which have an impact on the performance of the road. They extend or preserve the road. So these are fed into their 4-year pavement plan. And then when they get back the results, they basically can, in future years, assign these to the correct years for them to be executed. So these basically break down into one of two forms. They're either on the top, these are state force activities. So you can see that they have a work quantity and a cost, but you also have a breakdown of the labor costs, equipment costs, and material costs, because these are being done in-house. At the bottom, these are routine maintenance, which are done by a contractor. So these are just activities with work quantities and costs, and there is no breakdown of labor, equipment, and material because they're being contracted. Okay, and this screen is the annual work plan for Ohio. So on the top pane, you can see that there are several months here, July through June. So that's really just a breakdown where we can set how much work is going to be done in each month of the year. So it's really an annual plan where you can actually schedule out when the work is going to be done. You're really setting up a quantity of work to be done out here. And in the case of Ohio, they treat labor and equipment as sunk costs. So they are not budgeted on this, but what you will see is they have a material cost, so they have to purchase materials to do that, execute that work, any rental equipment, and any contracting costs. And they actually go in here. So this is just this same window in a form view, but they can click on the material cost, for instance, and put in the details. So the specific materials they need to purchase. They do the same thing for rental equipment and for contracted costs. So it's really a way for them to request additional funding beyond just the labor and equipment they need to generate their funding request. Okay, so this is another view of essentially the same window, which is the plan matrix. We are working on for Nevada. So this is what they call their betterments. So really in their pavement system, their stormwater management system, and their bridge management system, they can put in betterments or these project requests, which are to be executed by the maintenance division. So these all flow into the work plan, but it's really set up by project number, and they have the ability to put in the actual location. So it will be the actual road and mile points. They'll also be able to put in a specific asset that work needs to be done on. And then they will put in whether that work is going to be contracted, or, and that would be a view of if it's done by contract, so you'll be putting in capital improvement funds, or if it's going to be done by state forces where you can input operating funds. And they have basically estimating techniques that will be tied to this. Okay, so once you get your funding requests into the system, of course you have to justify these. So really, the justification is usually tied to, you have a contract essentially with your traveling public, the feds that are funding it, or your local agencies, that you're going to meet some mandated level of service. You also have to undertake to provide a safe transportation system, which ensures mobility. And I think the greatest problem we have right now, some of the greatest problems we have right now, of course, are surrounding congestion. So you need to I guess that's an important part of MAP 21, that we have goals for not only for safety and mobility, but also to address congestion. And also provide a reliable network to transport goods and services. And I think one of the things we saw this week from Stewart's talk was you can also project what the return on investment is of that, of actually spending those maintenance dollars or investing in maintaining your road network. Okay, so your funding requests can also facilitate a response to a disaster, whether you're undertaking emergency repair work to restore essential travel, which would be your FHWA and your FEMA B categories, or if you're undertaking more permanent repairs to restore damaged facilities, and that would be more FEMA A category work. And then, of course, you can access funding from your federal aid programs, such as the NHS and interstate maintenance. Okay, so really, I think a key component is that your funding requests should be transparent. So if you get, for instance, audited, you should be able to produce the data, to show how your funding requests were generated. They should show accountability for performance of maintained assets. So we're not just going out and asking for $10 million, but we have to show what the results will be and what levels of service we're going to be providing if we get that funding. And also, it's always better if we can encompass multi-year projections. So basically show how the funding would be distributed over multiple years and what the results will be. Okay, so I think the last part is basically reporting on work which is eligible for reimbursement. So I'm looking at what a few clients are doing. So we have the New Mexico, they have their federal 534 reports. Ohio has a current bill interface. Indiana, the FEMA FHWA reports. And then we look at how clients are using grouped work orders. So for instance, they can use work requests where there's damage to state property. They may issue multiple work orders from a work request and either have those costs interface as a group to address that issue, or they can set up a special project and issue the work from it to address a particular situation. But I'll also go through job orders, which are something that we have currently in development to address the similar situation. Okay, so this is the New Mexico 534. So what they have really is several processes which, when undertaken, basically qualify for federal reimbursement. So for instance, you have a number of processes which would be eligible work done on bridge structures or on road sections. And when their contracts are set up, they basically map each of the BOQ items to the relevant process. So this is an example of the 534 report. The top part of that really is a breakdown by functional class and locale, what work is being done. So you'll see that, you'll see the locale here, this is large urban, and the functional class interstate system. So there's really a separate page for each combination of those two. You can see what work is done on the national highway system and off the national highway system and what the totals are. And then they'll get a breakdown of how much work was spent on, for instance, bridge rehab, and then on regular maintenance. So really, for the fiscal year, they basically can run this report to get a breakdown of all the work which is eligible for federal reimbursement. And of course, they have backup views which show that data from the work order level all the way summarized up to this state level. Okay, so the second one is the current bill interface from Ohio. So this is a similar concept where they have processes such as construction engineering, overheads, and so on, and they basically have which one of these phases are eligible for federal reimbursement. So just a little bit of background, in Ohio, they have a custom module called the Planning, Engineering, and Construction module. And in there, they basically enter all their project work, basically all their time. They do time entry for all their project work. So whether they have a surveyor going out and recording time on a project, or the actual engineers who are monitoring those projects, they enter the time in for all these agencies. So each activity in the system is basically mapped, well, the relevant ones are mapped to an appropriate phase. And what that allows them to do is, as they enter time, any time which is entered against a project which is eligible for federal reimbursement, automatically goes into this interface staging table so that they can submit their bill for, this is for labor time reimbursement. They can submit that bill automatically to the feds. So that's really just a summary of what's being submitted. It's really the division. The PID is the project ID. This is the project activity code, what phase, what eligible phase is being billed, the actual date the work is being done on, how many hours, and what the cost of that is. So that really automates the billing of that time. Okay, so this I'm sure most of the clients with maintenance systems would be familiar with. So this is really just a work order, and there's a number of places that you can flag that work order to show that it's eligible for reimbursement. So this would be a damage to state property flag, a work request that you can basically tie the work order to, your FEMA A event flag, FEMA B event flag, and FHWA event. So any of these which get flagged can get picked up by a number of reports, whether it be an FHWA report or FEMA report, which can be set at different levels. Okay, so this is the job screen that we are currently working on. So the concept behind this is that as you go through and create your work orders, if you have the need to group those work orders by a job, you will be able to create that job on the fly. So in this case, I have a job which is, you'll see the job up here. It's an accident report. So I did some asphalt overlay. I repaired the asphalt. I repainted my lines, and I did some bridge and curb repair. But I can create a job on the fly in this window and assign those work orders to it. As we build this out, you'll actually see some summary level information on here. What's the total spent on the job? What is the start date across all those work orders, the end date, and so on. But in this window, you'll also be able to do all the edits to the underlying work orders. Okay, so this is a group. You'll be able to group your work by in different means. In this case, I'm grouping it by the job. But what you can see here is that I have this second work order expanded. So under there, I will be able to see my labor, my equipment, my material, and all these details, and I'll be able to do the edits of these directly in this screen without going to the other day cards window. This is a view of the labor, and of course I will have my maps and all that information in here as well. Okay, so that is the end of my presentation. So do we have any questions?